So now I'm going to talk about one of my favorite cover crops, which is not a very commonly recognized one, and that is chickweed. And so I like to wait until my chickweed is flowering and is actually going to seed before I change it over. And that's both for the reason that the chickweed will supposedly have more nitrogen and other nutrients to contribute to the soil, but it's also because I want there to be a layer of chickweed seeds in my garden beds so that once the hot season is over, because chickweed will not germinate in the hot season, and this technique will not necessarily work with chickweed in all parts of the world. But here in the southern Appalachians, it gets too hot for chickweed to be able to do much during the summertime. And so we can leave that bank of chickweed seeds in the soil. So I want to wait until it goes to seed so that those seeds are getting in the soil. And then I'm going to turn it over. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to pull any persistent weeds and any persistent weeds that have seeds on them, because I do not want the seeds of my dead nettle to be persisting in my garden bed. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the chickweed and I can either I can cut it with a scythe, or I can cut it with my little comma, or I can do this other technique, which is not something that you'll see in many books, but it's actually rolling the chickweed on itself, not with a big roller, but in a way that I will show you right now. So this is an amazingly fast, awesome way of getting the chickweed, killing the chickweed. And you'll notice that most of the roots of the chickweed are staying in the soil. And that is awesome because chickweed does really good things for the soil. Like often, I'm not seeing it this time, but often I'll see like visible mycorrhizae like under the chickweed that's growing. And this is actually a bed that I had planted winter peas in, but they just weren't very successful. But the chickweed was an amazing cover crop. So as you can see, this chickweed rolling technique is pretty easy, and honestly I find it to be just as fast as cutting it. And then something that's cool about this is, okay, so I'm rolling back the chickweed, and then my next step is going to be, and that's just to kill the chickweed and cut off the growth. And after I roll it back, I'm going to come back in here, and these more persistent weeds like these grasses, I'm going to pull out of the bed. And I'm of course knocking the soil off. The grasses, the dead nettle, it has seeds, even the sour grass. And then I'm not actually going to pull out all of the weeds because that you might not want to be watching because it's kind of boring. But this is very exciting. So then I can take this chickweed mat and I can just roll it back over the bed, which is very easy to do. And then after doing that, then I will spread a very thick layer of straw or hay on top of that, and the chickweed is going to break down. So this bed had the chickweed, I did exactly what I just did to this bed, I think it was a week and a half ago. And now you can see, I mean, look, it's so gorgeous. Like, I didn't add any compost to this bed. That chickweed made this beautiful compost. Yeah, I'm just love it. And so this was way less work than taking the chickweed and putting it in a compost bin and making compost. I just rolled it off and rolled it back on, and then I covered it with hay. And then this is going to be amazing to transplant into. And I could even just remove this hay and direct seed into this bed. It would do awesome. So yeah, I just love this technique. So this is yet another way to be changing a bed from chickweed into a crop. And this is specific to if you are wanting to direct seed your crop. And we have a lot of spring peepers going on here, which is really fabulous. There's a pond right behind the camera person. And so hopefully you can enjoy them and they aren't too distracting. They're definitely keeping up the biodiversity and keeping the biting insects away, which is fabulous. So what I did here is I didn't even pull the chickweed. I didn't roll the chickweed back. I didn't cut the chickweed. I just took this roofing tin and just put it on top of the chickweed. And so I put this roofing tin on top of the chickweed. I smothered it. I used occultation, which is a cool term for killing things. It definitely takes longer to kill things if they still are rooted in the ground than it would otherwise. So I put these here about 3 weeks ago. We haven't had super hot weather, but it hasn't been super cool either. So it's going to take more time to kill something if it is cold weather than if it's hot weather. And so I took out any persistent weeds like dock. And then I just put this roofing metal on here. And you can see the results. So this did really well. Like what we're left with is this amazingly squishy, like basically compost. Like that, it's just so amazing how well chickweed performs as a cover crop. It's just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's like sticking my hand in a compost pile. And this soil was not that great to begin with. So yeah, I'm just like such a fan. And then all we need to do to be able to plant into this is to just rake off this crop debris, which is not very significant. I mean, you can see the micro and macroorganisms during the occultation process did a great job of breaking down that chickweed. And I have the sense that because it didn't get that hot, that some of those creatures really engaged in the process, which is awesome. But it definitely took a little bit longer to kill it. And then before I seed into it, I will probably also just go ahead and use the back of my rake to just really make a nice flat, even seed bed. But yeah, I'm really pleased with this. And I think my seeds are going to be so happy to go into here. It's a little bit late, but I'm actually planning on planting parsnips into this bed. And the parsnips really want a clean, even seed bed because they have such small seeds that take so long to germinate. So yeah, this is just, I'm so pleased with this. But it does take some time. You have to think ahead of time. You have to do this in about 3 weeks before you're wanting to plant the seed. But the result is really awesome. If you want to sow immediately into a bed that has had chickweed in it, you're going to use this chickweed rolling technique that I showed you earlier to roll that chickweed back. But, the chickweed is likely not going to come back aggressively this time of year here because it's so hot. If you live in a cooler place, it might be more of an issue throughout the year. But it's still a good idea to, if you're going to plant directly in this, to use a hula hoe to kind of, just tell the roots, yeah, it's done. It's time to be done. But you can also, and probably a good idea to hula hoe first, and then take about an inch of compost and go over this whole thing if you are going to be planting tiny seeds, and if the soil in the bed just could use some sprucing up. And if you don't already have too much soil in the bed to where if you have raised beds, you're like overflowing, or if you have not raised beds, you're just like spilling, or don't have walls on your beds, you're just spilling soil into the paths. If you are in that situation where you have plenty of soil, then I would, if you need to direct sow into the bed, I would sow something that has a large seed, like a bean or corn or peas, although we're not really in the season of planting peas right now. And then I would use a hoe to make a furrow. Otherwise, if you're planting small seeds, And or if you could use some compost in the bed, then add like an inch of compost to it. And then you can go ahead and seed directly into that compost, and it works. Awesome. And then you can set aside this amazing green manure. You could use it as the base layer of mulch for another crop that's tall enough to really be taking on mulch right now. Or you, and then use some sort of brown mulch on top of it. Or you could set it aside and put it back on this bed. Another thing that I've done is I've just taken this roll and put it at the very back of my bed and just had it become this like really rich soil in the back of my bed. It's like a kind of passive, lazy compost method. And you can totally put this in your compost pile and use this as green matter, layer it with brown matter, and you're going to be making awesome compost. So the last method we're going to talk about is if you are wanting to transplant right away into a bed of chickweed. And so in order to do that, the first thing I would do is remove any weeds that are going to have seeds or be persistent, because you don't want them in your lovely pile of mulch, green manure here. You are going to pull those out. Then you're going to roll the chickweed back, as we have seen several times, the chickweed rolling method. These are weeds, so goodbye, weeds. We don't want you in our chickweed burrito. And then we are going to amend the soil under this roll as necessary, which may be especially necessary if you're growing particular crops. Like if you're growing a root crop, it can be good to add some sort of phosphorus source. It's a good idea to test your soil and make sure that you're not getting too much phosphorus anywhere, which I think I've mentioned many times, but it's an important thing. But definitely you might want to add some nitrogen or add some compost or whatever. And then you're going to put your transplants in, and then you're going to put this back around your plants. And then you are probably going to put some sort of brown manure on top of this. And so you will have your transplants in place, and then you will have your chickweed, lovely, nutritious mulch, like right on top of the soil. And then you will have some sort of brown mulch on top of that. So that is going to be a way to really feed your transplants that you've just put in. So this would be a really great method, again, for taller transplants. If you're transplanting in broccoli, like little broccolis or little lettuces or something like that, then you're just going to transplant into the soil itself and wait until they're a little bit bigger before you put the mulch on, because otherwise they'll just get devoured by slugs if you live in a wet area, or you might run the risk of smothering your little seedling, which would be very, very sad.